Hi, my name is Rosie and welcome to Rosie Rue Knits. This has been a highly requested video, and by highly requested, I mean 2 whole people asked me to do this video. I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but if 2 people walked in right now and asked me to show them everything I've ever knit, I would show them. So here we go. Everything I've ever knit / my knitting journey. So I learned to knit when I was 7 or 8 or 9, somewhere around there, I don't entirely remember. But my paternal grandmother taught me. So my dad's mother taught me how to knit. She was an avid knitter all her life and she decided to teach me. I can't remember now why I wanted to knit. I think I saw someone knitting and just thought it was so cool. And I asked for knitting needles for Christmas. My parents got me a Lionbrand kit. I don't have it anymore. I wonder if I can find a picture for you, but I do have the needles that it came with. The Lionbrand kit came with these needles. I still have them after all of these years. These are 8mm needles, plastic, and it came with yarn and a little instruction booklet. And I tried doing it on my own, following the instructions. I was, I think, 8. I had no idea what I was doing, and so my grandma came down to teach me. The first thing I made, I think, was a scarf. And unfortunately, I don't have anything from my younger years of anything that I had knit. I knit almost exclusively scarves for years and almost exclusively gift knits. I loved giving knit scarves as Christmas gifts, and I almost always just did them on these straight needles. My grandma was super excited that I wanted to learn to knit, and she bought me circular needles and a knitting bag and stoppers and anything I would need, which was really generous and I appreciate. I still mostly knit scarves, sometimes in the round, but mostly on straight needles. And my grandma did try to teach me to knit socks. I finished the cuff of one pair. I did finish a Christmas stocking. However, I did the entire leg. My grandma turned the heel for me, and then I got impatient and closed it up, and it looked terrible. It did not look like a Christmas stocking. It was this little stubby thing, and I was young enough I didn't know that you could unpick something like that and redo it, and so I think I threw it away as like a 9-year-old. And I didn't really knit much after those first few years other than scarves. I knit enough scarves periodically to remember how to knit, and in 2022 I got married, and shortly after I actually had mono and I was really sick. And I'm the type of person that likes to be productive all the time, and it was really terrible. It was a really bad case of mono, and it was really hard just sitting and watching movies. It was just so hard just sitting there, and so I was like, I want to knit again. I had seen all these crochet amigurumi, I think that's how you say it, amigurumi. I don't crochet, but they look so cute, these little stuffed animals, and so I wanted to try and knit one. How hard could it be? To this point, let it be said, I had never followed a pattern before. As a 8, 9, 10, 11 young knitter, I was really intimidated by patterns. And so when I took up knitting again, when I had mono, I just went for it. I didn't follow patterns. I can't. This is what I made. Now, my husband very affectionately calls this Big Chungus. So Big Chungus is a rabbit, if you cannot tell. Pom-pom. My husband says we're never allowed to get rid of this. So this is Big Chungus. This was the first thing I made returning to knitting. And you can see I actually knit the body and the head in the round. I did some decreasing, and I think I switched to a smaller cable. I only had fixed needles. So I did some decreases, switched to a smaller fixed cable, and then instead of doing, I did some decreases, I think. I remembered how to decrease, and then I just cinched it. So there's quite a bit of gathering, but not too bad. And actually, for not knitting for forever, pretty even stitch tension. This is acrylic yarn that has not been blocked, obviously. The underside is a little concerning. I think that is how you can tell I just cinched it. I didn't even do decreases. So maybe I didn't know how to decrease at the time. So that is pretty messy. Now, I couldn't remember how to purl at the time. I thought I did, but I was doing it wrong, and I don't know why I didn't think to YouTube it. YouTube wasn't really a thing when I started knitting, and so if you look at these, it almost looks crocheted. I have no idea what I did. They're very twisted. I think I was twisting my pearls, but it made a cool texture. It is actually kind of a cool effect. So that on here and on the arms and the legs, you can tell that there's something weird happening versus the stockinette stitch here. And then I cut out some felt and put it on, and I did some embroidery with yarn. I made a pom-pom. So that is Big Chungus. Just very funny. So this was my dive back into knitting. I think I attempted to make a baby sweater as well for one of my nephews who was being born at the time. I don't think it turned out very good. I don't have it anymore. I did gift it. I then made a second stuffed animal, and I don't have this one. This one was gifted to one of my nephews, but I will put in a picture here. And this is a dinosaur. I think this one was a lot more successful than Big Chungus. I was remembering a little bit more about knitting. Then I decided to delve right into the world of garments, and I made my first sweater. I did not follow a pattern for this. I didn't even gauge swatch. I heard that wool yarn was better than acrylic, and so I went to Joann's and I bought Lionbrand Wool Ease without doing any research. I had never heard of it before, but I said, oh, it has some wool in it. So this is Lionbrand Wool Ease. I couldn't tell you what needles I knit these on. I have no idea. It's a pretty large gauge though, and this actually has been well worn. This was worked bottom up and seamed, including the sleeves. The sleeves are also seamed. I just didn't know that you could do a sweater top down. I do believe that I picked up the collar in the round. That is the only thing that was done in the round. It is not double folded. It is a regular bind off. No twisted ribbing or anything, just really plain Jane basic. I did do some shaping for the neckline, and I was really impressed in myself that I could do that. This fits surprisingly well. It's just very chunky. The only time I ever really wear this is if I'm really cold. Like if I got back from skiing or something and can't warm up, I would wear this sweater just because of how chunky it is. It's really hot, but it has been worn. It's a little pilly. I don't know if you can tell. Let me hold it up. But again, for my first ever sweater, self-drafted, I mean, not the cleanest decreases or seaming, but fairly even knitting. Yeah, pretty happy with it being my first sweater. So then I just got a little cocky and I made a second sweater. This is the second self-drafted sweater. This one was a little bit of a flop. I had started watching Kutafukica's YouTube channel. So Veronica Lindberg is a knitwear designer, and she has a YouTube channel called Kutufakika. And she had mentioned how to self-draft sweaters and talked about gauge swatching. So I tried to knit a gauge swatch unsuccessfully, and I measured and somehow made this giant sweater. Way too wide. This is also 100% acrylic. I just went to Joann's and picked something because the wool was so hot, and I didn't know that that was because of the gauge, that it was chunky. I just thought wool was hot. So I went back to acrylic, and I did knit these sleeves in the round and did not do many, if not any, decreases. And so I did this insane balloon sleeve that are way too short. I have still worn this one quite a bit. There's actually quite a bit of pilling on it. I don't know if you can see there. It's very comfy because it's so oversized, and I was so proud of it when I finished it. So this was also knit bottom up in the round, and then I picked up for the sleeves top down in the round, and then did the insane decreasing for these balloon sleeves. And I picked up for the collar in the round. This is one I don't wear much anymore now that I have made more sweaters that are way better. And it's so pilly. I've considered picking apart the sleeves. That's the big thing, is the sleeves are just so short. I've considered picking back and making the sleeves longer so that the sleeves are also long and oversized, but it's acrylic yarn. I just don't know if it's worth it. So let me know what you think on that one. But there was sweater number 2. Then, after I finished knitting my second sweater, I decided I was being a little bit of a selfish knitter, and I decided to make something for my husband, and I made this, again, self-drafted sweater. Look at this monstrosity. It's huge. My husband's really tall, but he is fairly slim, so this is giant. I had no idea what I was doing. I just cast on and started going. This was also knit bottom up in the round, and then these sleeves were picked up in the round. And I didn't do very many decreases, if at all. That is just a rectangle. And my husband requested a hood, which I had never done before, and I just kind of did something. I think yeah, you can see I did some increases in a V shape here. Not bad for a self-drafted hood. I had no idea what I was doing. It's just huge, and the sleeves are a little wonky, and it's knit in acrylic. So this was so close. This was almost good, and this was the project that made me realize I should maybe try a pattern, because it was so close and it was so huge and so much work that it was so sad that it was mediocre when I finished. And so, being the beginner knitter that I was, I decided to jump into a lace and cabled sweater pattern. Let me grab it. I finished the hoodie for my husband actually in January of this year, so I'm a relatively recent convert to knitting patterns. And that's why it's interesting to talk about my knitting expertise level, because I feel like a beginner knitter. However, I have been doing the active knitting on and off since I was 8. So I have really great tension, I'm quite skilled, I can increase and decrease. I'm really confident with the knits and the purls. And so it was really easy to pick up more difficult skills, even though I only started reading patterns in January of this year, 2025. And the first pattern I decided to read was the Salty Days Sweater by Veronica Lindberg. Here it is. It has some eyelets as well as a simple cable motif, and it features quite a bit of 1x1 ribbing instead of stockinette as the main part of the body, and the eyelet motif is repeated on the sleeves. I loved this sweater. I was still understanding wool and superwash wool and gauge swatching, and so it's a little small, but not uncomfortably so. It's just more fitted than I thought it would be. I went to my local yarn store because I knew I wanted nice yarn, and I said, here's the pattern. I would like superwash wool, or I thought I did, and they told me to get Cascade 220 superwash. So that is what this is knit in. And as my first knitting pattern, I'm really happy with this. The thing I'd like to point out that I'm slightly unhappy with is that I wasn't great at switching to a new ball of yarn. I don't know if you can see. It just gets a little wonky where I tried to switch because I just would cut the yarn and tie it in a knot. I Googled how to weave in ends because the knot looked bad, especially there in that ribbing. So that's how I learned to weave in ends, but it was still a little messy at that point. But for my first sweater with a pattern, pretty happy with that. When I decided to follow a pattern for my Salty Days sweater, I had heard about interchangeable needles and I decided to get some. I knew I liked metal needles over wooden needles, but I wasn't ready to dish out all of the money for Xiaogu needles, and I still haven't. That's on my maybe wish list sometime. And so I actually bought this set off of Amazon, and let me show you. Some of them are in use, but here are the needles. Pretty copper color. They're cheap, and you can tell they come unscrewed really easily, but they've worked so far for my purposes. The one frustrating thing is that the cable lengths on normal interchangeable needles, the length includes the length of the needles, Whereas these actually, if it's a 60 centimeter cord, the cord is 60 centimeters, and that is not counting the length of the needles. So when I'm knitting something with a 40 centimeter circumference, the needles are a little too long for, say, sleeves or something like that. So I end up having to do magic loop or use a pair of my shorties. But for the price, these serve me pretty well so far. I do hope to upgrade someday, but so far so good. I have to unscrew them or re-screw on the cord pretty often while I'm knitting, but I haven't lost stitches due to them yet, so yeah. After my Salty Days sweater, I decided to dive right into Colorwork. I was a beginner with patterns. I didn't really understand what was difficult and what wasn't. It all just seemed like knitting to me. So I decided to do the songbird mittens. These are my songbird mittens. And so these were the next thing that I knit. This is knit using a yarn that I got in the Joann's closing sale. That is a Superwash merino yarn. I can't remember the name of it. I will put it up here. For the second time ever following a pattern and first time doing color work, these turned out pretty great. There's a little bit of tension issues, but not bad. They blocked out pretty well. The only hard thing is I used double pointed needles for the first time on the thumb, and it has a little bit of a ridge or laddering, but it's not bad. So I made these next, and then I had leftover yarn, and so I made this matching beanie. Pretty cute, pretty happy with that. After the beanie, I decided to make my Portobello sweater. This is my first time doing stripes, first time doing any sort of button band. Actually, this was my first raglan, but it was quite simple. Great pattern. And again, I have such a weird skill level because I have great tension. Knitting isn't difficult. I was just learning how to read a pattern, just adding more skills to my arsenal, but none of them seemed very difficult because I had been knitting for so many years. So there is my Portobello sweater. My husband requested a moose beanie, and I went on Ravelry, and I didn't love a lot of the designs that were on there, so I did a self-drafted one. And this is using leftover acrylic yarn from his hoodie so that they would kind of match. It was just yarn I had on hand. I hope to make a really nice sweater out of wool or merino wool for my husband, possibly the zipper sweater by Petite Knit sometime. But in the meantime, this is his moose hat that is a self-drafted pattern. Let me try it on for you. And now I'm a little rusty on the exact order. These all kind of happened close to simultaneously. I still had some leftover yarn from my songbird mittens, and so I decided to make a Sophie scarf so that I'd have a little matching set of hat, mittens, and scarf. I didn't actually follow the pattern for this one. I just cast on, did I-cord. I had weighed my exact number of grams, and I weighed it periodically so that when it was just a gram or two away from halfway, I started decreasing. So that way I used up every last bit of my scrap yarn. And I also made my George socks, which I talked about in my first podcast. And then my I'm So Tulip socks, which I also talked about in my first podcast. And now we're caught up to all of the other garments I've made in my recent time. I talked about my striped pipe sweater and my step-by-step sweater in my first podcast. I'll hold them up really fast. This is my striped pipe sweater by Veronica Lindberg. This is knit using Drops Belle. I talked all about it in my last knitting podcast. And this is my step-by-step sweater by Florence Miller that I also talked about a lot in my last knitting podcast video. And I have two more recent finished objects that I will talk about in my next knitting podcast video next week. So I hope you tune in for that. I'm really excited about them. One of them is my porcelain sweater, which I showed in my porcelain sweater vlog, but the other one is a matching beanie and it's super cute. So you should tune in next week. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions about my knitting journey, anything I didn't answer, please let me know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Bye!